Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Sport Cardiff's Q&A session. I'm pleased to be able to welcome colleagues from Sport Wales Grants team who are going to be with us this afternoon, where we're going to be talking about the Be Active Wales Fund. Just to introduce myself, my name's Gareth. I work with Sport Cardiff on behalf of the local authority. And then I'm pleased to welcome Kerry Richards and Annalise Lewis from Sport Wales' Grants team. I'm just going to start by asking them a couple of questions, just so we get to know a little bit about them, because there are genuine people behind the application process, and so it'd be nice to get to know them a little bit, and then we'll kind of delve into the nitty-gritty of the Be Active Wales Fund. So just by way of starting, I'll start with you, Kerry. Just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what your sporting background is, and what's your role with Sport Wales.
Yeah, thanks, Gar, and thanks for the invite to the call this afternoon. Pranam, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Kerry Richards, and I'm the Senior Investment Team Lead at Sport Wales. I've worked at Sport Wales for longer than I care to remember, actually. It's been a long time. Pretty much the whole time I've been there, I've worked in the grant/stroke investment function. We're lucky enough to have a job which allows us to deal with all sports across the whole of Wales. So it's a very interesting and a worthwhile job, albeit like most of us at the moment, the last 6 months, things have been pretty strange and pretty unprecedented, to use a common term at the moment. But yeah, so I help look at the investments, look at facilities and planning for what is needed across Wales for the sporting sector. During the current time, obviously, it's all related to COVID-19.
Bro, thanks, Kerry. And have you got a particular sporting background or passion?
Well, there's two of us on this call from Sport Wales, and it's fair to say that one of us is an elite athlete and one of us is an elite supporter. So on that note, I'll hand it over to Annalise.
Okay, thanks, Kerry. So same questions to you, Annalise. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do with Sport Wales.
So I'm the Senior Support and Investments Officer at Sport Wales. There's two of us. The other one couldn't join us today on the call. Very similar to Kerry's role, we work across all clubs, all local authorities, national governing bodies in Wales to hopefully supply some grassroots clubs with much needed funding. I've always been interested in sport, and I've been part of Sport Wales for nearly 2 years now. So yeah, I really enjoy it. And I play a little bit of football myself, so it's a nice environment to be in.
Yeah, I get the impression you're being modest there, saying you play a little bit of football.
Well, we just got promoted this year, so that's why Kerry's nudging to an elite athlete status. We start our season on Sunday, which is just quite nice. I'm looking forward to getting back to it.
Okay, bro. Well, all the best with that. And I was just wondering for both of you, what's the part of the job that you most enjoy?
For me, it's this, in a way, this call, albeit I would rather do this in person. It's meeting people. It's getting to meet different people from different parts of Wales who represent different sports. And you know, we normally work in an office. We haven't worked in an office the last 6 months or so, but in the office, on Annalise's first day, I said to her that no 2 days are alike, and not even no 2 days are alike, no two meetings are alike, or no two phone calls are alike, because every conversation you have with the variables of the sport and the different parts of Wales are so different, and that's what I enjoy. It's you know, every day offers some other challenge or some other learning opportunity that no 2 days are the same, and I like that. It's not monotonous. You are doing similar work all the time, naturally, but you're doing it in a different environment or with different people or with different sports, and it's fascinating and it's really rewarding as well.
Cool. How about you, Annalise?
Yeah, I'm very much the same as Kerry. I love going around the different clubs, and like Kerry said, on my first day, he was like, you won't have any 2 days the same, and it's truth that some of the places I've been, you go from one extreme to another. But I like the fact that, you know, we play a small part in helping grassroots clubs, and even if it's a small amount of money we give to them, sometimes the difference that can make and what they can achieve through it then is really nice to see, and is quite rewarding.
Yeah, I'm sure it must be rewarding seeing the difference that the funding does make to communities as well. So, Brill, thanks very much for that, guys. So, moving on to the Be Active Wales Fund itself, can you tell me, what is the Be Active Wales Fund, and what's the journey been to this point? Because it's a fairly new fund, so just tell us a little bit about the background.
I'll start with the background, Gav, probably from lockdown. So we went into lockdown sort of mid-late March, and initially for the period of early April to the end of June, Sport Wales launched the Emergency Relief Fund, the ERF, which was for the vast majority of that time for all sports that were in lockdown. 1 or 2 would come out by the end of June or early June, but effectively it was a fund to pay fixed costs or essential costs that had to be paid regardless of any income coming in. So that was the ERF, and then that sort of grew then into the Be Active Wales Fund, which is made up of 2 strands. If I touch upon perhaps Protect, and Annalise perhaps can prepare. So the Protect strand of Be Active Wales was effectively the Emergency Relief Fund in another name. Being honest, we honestly thought that when we were launching this fund mid-late June, that many sports would still be in lockdown for the majority of the summer, maybe in the early winter. So we thought, early autumn, sorry. So we thought that the 2 strands, Protect and Prepare, would be quite distinct and would be both needed. But we've been surprised at how quickly Welsh Government or national governing body guidelines have allowed sport to return, albeit not normal and back to normal, but some variation of the sport has been able to return. Therefore, the Protect strand of our Be Active Wales Fund over the last couple of weeks or months really has become a little bit less popular, and it's the Prepare strand which is taking up the majority of the applications.
If I jump in quickly then on the Prepare, so as Kerry said, Protect was just looking after those clubs when we were in the initial lockdown, and our Prepare strand is essentially a strand that helps clubs, organisations move back into sport.
Insured up to £1 million and £10,000 possession or whatever. So I just thought, oh, what's that way?
So if I quickly touch on that then, so our Prepare strand was to move clubs and organisations back into sport. We want to support them in moving alongside their national governing body and Welsh Government guidelines. And Prepare, I would say, is where the majority of the clubs are and the majority of sport at this moment. They might not be back in full capacity playing fixtures, etc., but they can return to training in some sort of way. Our Prepare criteria was up to £50,000, but what we found is the majority of sports that can go back, they can go back on quite a small amount. It just might be a case of additional equipment. So, for example, football and rugby clubs, we tended to look at a lot of additional bibs, hand sanitisers and balls, where maybe beforehand you could share your bibs and you would pass them around, whereas with what's going on at this moment in time, you can't. And then also the big thing was we just wanted to ensure that when clubs went back, they were aligned into national governing body guidelines. So any applications that we get in, our first point of call is going to that governing body and saying, can this club do this? And are these items the right way to go? And that's the main thing we've had feedback on. And just to touch on it, we want to make sure that all the clubs and organisations that come in for Be Active Wales, when they return into their training environment, they feel confident and safe, because we know that, a lot of individuals might still be quite apprehensive about going back into the sport, and is it the right environment to go into? So is ensuring that, you make that environment as safe and you give the individuals who are coming into it confidence to go back into this sport and get back to enjoying it as well.
The other point to note, perhaps, is that going back to my point around the Emergency Relief Fund, Sport Wales took the decision that from sort of mid or early April onwards, all funding that we would have had for grant programmes, and that includes community chest and development grants, were totally repurposed into a sort of a recovery fund, of which the ERF and now the Be Active Wales Fund falls out of that. It may well be inadvertently, admittedly, but we have seen some applications that have included some, direct responses to COVID around PPE and hand sanitizers, etc., but also feel more like a community chest application or even a development grant application. Those kind of what we call normal developmental type applications at present are on hold. And we hope that, very soon we can return to a more normal situation where we can consider sort of more normal applications. But where applicants would have applied for a community chest over the summer, and I'm sure there are people on the call today who've had community chest, that is not the emphasis of the fund at present. The fund is in direct relation to COVID, and as Annalise said, to return safely and in confidence, and over and above what you would normally have needed had there been no pandemic.
Okay, thanks, Kerry and Annalise. So, for what are the types of organisations that are eligible to apply? So
we've made this fund available to all not-for-profit organisations. By definition, that's going to catch the vast majority of sports clubs because they're voluntary. We have had some organisations that are not voluntary, but maybe social enterprises, community interest companies, or even charities. We may ask a little bit more information on their sort of organisational structure and maybe how they would distribute any surplus funds or any surplus profits. But we've had only a handful of applicants, I guess, that we've had to turn down because of their organisational type. I think the vast majority of people know whether they're eligible or not and can demonstrate that if needs be. Okay,
thanks, Kerry. And you touched on earlier on around how this fund is different from community chest and development grants that we've had in the past. So are there any criteria, or are there certain things that are eligible to apply for, certain things that aren't eligible, or how does it work?
The biggest thing I think for any applicants to remember for this fund is got to be a direct link to COVID and why your training has to change, or it's got to be that you've got to create that link. And for example, don't try and create a link for the sake of it. So we do get some applications that, okay, you might need new floodlights, for example, but changing them to LED.
Oh, we've lost you a second, Annalise.
Sorry. Yeah, so for example, if you wanted to change your floodlights from standard bulbs to LEDs, you can put down that you've lost money because of COVID and you were going to do that, but that's not getting you back to sport. You can still get back to sport with your floodlights there. So it's things like, as I touched upon, if your national governing body guidelines say that you need additional bibs, smaller gridded areas, we could look at cones, bibs, balls, different equipment that you need, or we can look at hand sanitizers and PPE, because obviously that's essential at the moment. I think the main thing to think about is, as much as clubs still need to develop and they want the development fund, at this moment in time, sport can't progress like it normally does. So we just want to ensure that you're going back safely first, and then hopefully when things go back to some sort of normality, we can bring in more of a developmental fund and get back to that sort of community chest and development grant style funding.
Okay, thanks, Annalise. That's really helpful. Going back to something I think Kerry mentioned at the start in terms of the scope of the fund, so you can apply from anything from £300 up to 50,000. How does that differ between the two strands? Because you mentioned the Protect and the Prepare.
Yeah, so Protect is exactly the same as the ERF, the emergency fund, was between April and June. So it's between £300 and 5,000, and it's up to 100% funding. And the majority of applications we have are 100% funding. So there is no need for an organisation to contribute unless they want to, obviously, or unless they've applied for slightly more than 5,000, they want to put 500 to it. But in effect, Protect is up to 5,000. Protect is capped at 5,000. Prepare is £300 to £50,000. But as with Protect, Prepare applications from £300 to 5,000 are up to 100% funding. Over 5,000, or between 5,000 and 50,000, it's a minimum 15% contribution. So in other words, if somebody applied for 10,000 and they were to receive every penny of that, there would be 8,500 from us and 1,500 from them as contribution. But what sometimes happens is that an applicant will provide a sort of shopping list on an application form for, say, 6 elements, and we might only fund 3, or might only fund 2 or 5 or whatever. But if the award is over 5,000, there will be a request for a contribution from the applicant, yeah. And that could be their own funding, or it could be other money, it could be other grants, sponsorship or whatever, but there will be an expectation over 5,000 for the applicant to contribute.
Okay, and then can clubs apply for both Protect and Prepare?
So clubs can apply for both, but what we've said is we would expect, and like I said, a lot of clubs have moved out of that Protect phase now, but what we would expect, apply for Protect. Initially, when the sport was in lockdown, they couldn't pay maybe their utility costs and insurance bills or something like that, and then they would move to a Prepare stage. But we wouldn't, once you moved into Prepare, we wouldn't then go back and fund Protect, because you've sort of moved on from that phase now and you're going back into sport. And like I said, as much as it's not the same way as it was previously, you still should be able to maybe develop an income from some sort of subs, etc.
Just on that point, I think it's important to note that be it Protect or Prepare, we are typically looking at applications that cover a 3-month period. And that's done for 2 reasons. One is to try and make the money stretch as far as possible across all the clubs. So, rather stopping clubs coming for 2 years funding. But secondly, the 3-month limit is there because, Annalise and I both live in local authorities that are currently in local lockdown. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone next month, by December or whatever. So it may be in a couple of months' time, the situation is different again, and we may have to relook at how we do things. So we've decided that a 3-month period will be fine for clubs for the short term, but also it protects the pot in case we have to adapt or adjust it based on what's happening outside with the virus.
Okay, thanks both. And if a club has applied for a Prepare application and a period of time passes, are they able to come back in, or is it just a kind of one shot at the Prepare?
A Prepare is essentially one shot, is getting them back into sport, and the decision was made obviously from Sport Wales, but also talking to NGBs and LAs. They've said, once they've got that equipment in place, they should be fine then to move into sport. And like we said, is hopeful that we'll go back to a bit more of normality. So then in the end, they would have just had that additional equipment and they can continue to use that.
Yeah, thanks, Annalise. That makes sense. And if a club has an application that's been rejected, are they able to reapply?
Yes, they are, Guy. Yeah, they can. Yeah. With the emergency fund, it was one application only, successful or not. But for the Be Active Wales fund, you are allowed to reapply. Yeah. But obviously, common sense would dictate that if you don't reapply for exactly the same elements, take on board any comments that we've given, even if they might not agree with those comments. But just as importantly, where possible, to either contact yourself or colleagues through Sport Cardiff for advice pre-resubmission, or to contact the governing body where relevant, or any other partners that can help.
Brilliant, thanks, Kay. I was going to ask later on actually what support is out there for clubs, organisations looking to apply. Obviously, there's the Sport Wales website, which has got some really great resources and information on there. Who else, or what other support is out there, Kerry?
So there's the Sport Wales website, and on the website, I think about a third of the way down the main page, there's like a big button with Help Centre on, and it's a new bit of technology we've used since July, and we find it very helpful. And on the Help Centre, you can type in any word, and there are, dozens, if not more, preloaded questions or preloaded sentences that any word that you key in, if you put, say, retrospective, okay, it would come up with a question saying, can I apply for retrospective funding? And the answer is no, but it would tell you that. So some of the questions applicants might have might be able to be answered. We're not trying to avoid contact with applicants at all, but it might be a good start, you know, to type in a few basic questions, and then any other ones that either are not answered or need further clarity, we're happy to help. Or obviously yourself, Gar, with Sport Cardiff, or I say any other partners, the local CVS, C3SC, or the governing body. But the help centre is a good sort of first stop shop.
Yeah, bro, it's a really, really good resource, and I'm sure clubs and organisations are already finding that really useful, and it's it's good to highlight that. And I probably just reiterate, and on the back of what Kerry was saying, that at Sport Cardiff we're here to support and help you with applications as well. So we really would encourage people to get in touch prior to applying, to have some support and advice in getting that application in, just to increase the chances that you'll be successful, and hopefully save you time and support you along the journey as well. So there's definitely the support out there. What would be your advice or top tips to a club organisation either considering or making an application?
I think the biggest thing is really sit down and work out what the club needs to return safely first. It's easy to put together a shopping list and come in for an application, and then if certain elements are turned down, I understand the club will get disheartened by it. But like you said, Gar, if they can get in touch with you, you know as well, you can help advise. And also really importantly, to look at the national governing body guidelines and where your sport is at this moment, because there's different phases for each sport. And for example, football might be in one place, golf might be in a completely different place, so they don't all align. So it's really important to know exactly where you are and what they need. And again, like the governing bodies are a really good place to go to ask, and they'll offer advice as well on what you essentially need or what would be good things to look at and think about.
Yeah, and I suppose you touched on it earlier around when you're making your application is being clear on your rationale behind why you need something. If you're asking for something, an element of the application, you need to provide that, the justification, the rationale behind why you need that. And importantly, I think you touched on earlier how it's kind of got to be linked back to the impact of COVID-19 rather than looking at a more general kind of development style application. And anything else to add on that, Kerry?
No, I think Annalise has covered it all there, and hopefully the criteria and the advice and the guidance available can help applicants. It's applying for what you actually need purely because of COVID.
Yeah.
And we are reinforcing that message. And I'm conscious there will be interpretations of that and different opinions of what COVID has caused and what it hasn't caused. But we are trying to ensure that clubs or organisations can return safely and in confidence, and are applying for elements that are post-March lockdown.
Yeah. So the general kind of advice is for organisations to do a bit of groundwork, understand the criteria, understand why they're applying for what they're applying for, and communicating that clearly in their applications.
Definitely, and it may be gathered in an application. As I said earlier, there may be 6 elements, and even if 3 are deemed unsuitable or low priority, we can still fund the other 3. So you don't get penalised for some elements not being eligible or suitable, but it's just to try and manage applicants' expectations that they may put a lot of work into application form. If the application form is ineligible or low priority, it may not get funded.
Okay, bro. And if a club puts in an application, what's the kind of turnaround that they can expect to actually receive that money? Because a lot of clubs, a lot of sports are kind of in that process of getting back involved, and sometimes things progress quite quickly. What's the sort of timescales that we're looking at?
So for both Protect and Prepare under £5,000, you're looking at about a 2-week turnaround. So we tried to process the applications as soon as possible, but we're still getting quite a lot in at the moment. But it's normally 2 weeks they would have had a decision by. Anything over 5,000 for Prepare. Again, we tried to get them processed as quick as possible, and if we can get them done in a 2-week period, we aim to do it. but it can take anything up to a month. And that also depends on if the project or the items that you're coming in for is slightly more complicated and we need to liaise more with, like yourself, Gar, and also the national governing bodies. It might just take a little bit longer, but obviously anything that falls over that 4-week period, we'll get back in contact with the applicant at the time and just say, look, it is being processed. We're just working it up as well. But yeah, the majority will be processed within a month.
One other point just to note, Gar, it's kind of going back a little bit, and it's not, I know it's not been popular amongst some clubs, but it's the decision the Sport Wales has taken, is that any application would not consider loss of income. That is, I'm conscious that's quite a divisive thing to say, perhaps for some clubs who will have lost income through summer festivals or tournaments they planned that lockdown meant couldn't happen. But an application will not, we obviously sympathise, but the application would not consider replace or replenishing lost income. It's only purchasing items that would help the sport return safely. And hopefully by us helping to purchase, it does help the club's cash flow, but it does not consider lost income.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks both very much. That's really really helpful, and really appreciate your input on that.